Okay, moving on to the next segment of today's show. Over the last couple weeks since the NFL draft, each football episode, I've been picking a different division throughout the National Football League and going over each team in that division's draft, as well as after going over which team I like the most in that division and what I really think of each team currently in that division. And unfortunately, today is going to be the last division we go over in that series, and that division we're going to be going over today is the NFC North. So without further ado, let's start with the drafts. The first team I want to go over is the Detroit Lions, and the Lions were a team that in this draft a lot of people really did have their eyes on because they had to start off the number 3 pick. And the Lions, I think, going into this draft were in a very interesting situation, and that's because they could have gone many different ways. And when you throw in the element of trading the pick, especially when you're a team that has your franchise quarterback like the Detroit Lions do with Matthew Stafford, and they, possibly could have heard phone calls about either the quarterbacks in this draft, they definitely could have made a move. But at the same time, they ended up staying put at number 3 and ended up taking Jeff Okudah, the corner from Ohio State. Corner was really a move and a necessity for this Detroit Lions team as they ended up trading Darius Slay in the offseason to the Philadelphia Eagles. So they took him with number 3. Another pick I like that the Lions made was taking DeAndre Swift, the running back from Georgia, with the number 35 overall pick. And I like Kerryon Johnson, but I think the Detroit Lions, they haven't had a legit running game that you feared for a while now, and I think hopefully DeAndre Swift as the second running back off the board in this draft could provide you with that, hopefully. When you look at this Lions offense, and really the way this whole Lion team is built, they shouldn't be that bad. On the offensive side of the ball, this should be a top 10 offense with Stafford and Swift and Kerryon and Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones and Hockenson, who they drafted with a top 10 pick a couple of years ago. They have an improving offensive line. And on defense, Matt Patricia is supposed to be a defensive mastermind. And they've gotten plenty of names over the last couple of years, and it hasn't worked out. A lot of people, when it comes to the Detroit Lions, have just said, just give it time, and Matt Patricia just needs to get his kind of guys in there. It's hard to respect a coach that acts like Bill Belichick when he doesn't have all the rings like Bill Belichick does. But at the same time, I don't want to say time is running out, but Matthew Stafford has been in Detroit for a while now. And I'm not saying that it's all his fault, but he hasn't won a playoff game ever. And it's just a very big disappointment when you look at this Detroit Lion team. They need to eventually get there. And if this team doesn't make the playoffs this year, I could easily see them pulling the plug on Matt Patricia. Going into his hire, a lot of New England fans really did like him, and Patriot fans were upset to see him go. And at the time, I thought he definitely deserved a shot to at least become a coach in the National Football League. I thought it would work out definitely better than it has so far, but at the same time, Detroit is under a lot of pressure this year. They need to at least make the playoffs. They also take Julian Okwara, the outside linebacker from Notre Dame. I think this is a solid pick, along with improving their offensive line by taking Logan Stenberg, the guard from Kentucky. So I think Detroit overall, I'm going to give their draft a B+. I like the pick of Okudah. I like the pick of Swift. I was very fascinated to see if Detroit would actually end up trading back if a team wanted a quarterback, unfortunately, or really just whatever. They didn't do that. So I'm going to give Detroit a B+. I like their top 2 picks. Okay, moving on to the next team in the NFC North whose draft we will be talking about, and that will be the Green Bay Packers. And the Green Bay Packers were a team that a lot of people had their eyes on going into this draft, and that's because a lot of people didn't really know what they would do, and they ended up shocking the world and taking Jordan Love, the quarterback from Utah State. And even though a lot of people, including myself on this show, have bashed this pick, I didn't hate it at the time because I did think, even though the Green Bay Packers were one win away from the Super Bowl last year, and they could have obviously improved in any facet, if they think Jordan Love is their quarterback of the future, and they think that after Aaron Rodgers leaves Green Bay, this is going to be their guy, I have no problem with them taking him. My main issue with the Green Bay Packers draft is, and I said this when they took Jordan Love, I don't mind the pick. You just really need to do something good with your second-round pick, and that pick was the number 62 overall pick. And this is the main problem I have with the Green Bay Packers draft, is that they took A.J. Dillon, the running back from Boston College. And I actually like A.J. Dillon. My guy Andrew Wisner, who's been on the show a bunch, is a Boston College alum, and he's been, current student, and he's actually been telling me that A.J. Dillon is going to be a real good player in this league, and I've been paying attention to A.J. Dillon and his game for a while, like really since his freshman year at BC. But the problem is the Packers don't need a running back, and especially in the second round. Like, the one strength of their offense is they actually have some good running back depth with Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams. And they have Devontae Adams as a top wide receiver, but they haven't taken anyone or haven't gotten any Aaron Rodgers any help in the first couple rounds of drafts over the last couple years. Green Bay has actually not drafted a skill position player in the first round since Aaron Rodgers has been there. And that is just a crazy stat. And that was my main problem with the Packers draft. Once again, not that they took Jordan Love and they drafted Aaron Rodgers' replacement. Like, if they think he is the next guy and he's the next guy up, that's fine. They just wanted to address the future of their franchise. Whatever. Aaron Rodgers isn't a young guy anymore. He doesn't have that many years left. But at the same time, and he may, by the way, like, obviously we've seen quarterbacks play into their 40s, but I don't know. Aaron Rodgers, he needs to start winning some big games, and obviously this team was very successful last season. The Packers were 1 win away from the Super Bowl, and when you compare that to their preseason expectations, most Packer fans would have signed up for that NFC Championship game appearance right away. But at the same time, it was that they didn't upgrade around Aaron Rodgers after that pick enough, or in free agency. I'm giving the Packers draft a C-. Even though I liked the Jordan Love pick, especially if they think he's going to be the quarterback of the future. And by the way, I didn't like it. I was okay with it. They also did take a couple tight ends, but I don't know, man. I just think wide receiver was really the way to go. And the fact that they didn't take a wide receiver in this draft just boggles my mind. Okay, moving on to the next team in the NFC North, whose draft we will be going over, and that will be the Minnesota Vikings. And the Vikings were actually a team that I had my eye on going into this draft because they had multiple first-round picks. And with the number 22 overall pick, they take Justin Jefferson, the wide receiver from LSU. Wide receiver was a big need for this Minnesota Viking team because besides Adam Thielen, they really didn't have anyone that they could just trust and slot in as their number 2 receiver behind him, but they're hoping Justin Jefferson could be that guy. Jefferson was unbelievable during his time at LSU. Him and Joe Burrow really developed some nice chemistry, so I think him playing in Minnesota as a number 2 receiver to start, at least behind Adam Thielen, that is really good. And then with the number 31 pick, the Vikings take Jeff Gladney, the corner from TCU. And this is another pick I liked because it really filled their hole. I don't know how many of you guys really realize this, but the Minnesota Vikings defense loses a lot from last year's squad. Everson Griffin, he still hasn't even signed with the team, but it's pretty well known that he's not coming back to Minnesota. They lose Trey Waynes in the secondary, and they just lose a bunch of other really big pieces of that defense. They also lose Mackenzie Alexander at cornerback, and that's another big loss as he played some big time minutes or big time playing time for the Minnesota Vikings last year. And in terms of the corner position, there's still plenty of guys available, but I like the pick of Jeff Gladney. Also at 58, they take Ezra Cleveland, the offensive tackle from Boise State, I think the Vikings offensive line last year was I don't want to say a surprise, but it was better than most people expected. And when you have a running back like Dalvin Cook that is just so dynamic in the open field with the football, you're going to want him to give him as good of a chance as possible. And I think Ezra Cleveland in the second round at number 58 overall is a very good value pick there. They take at number 89 overall Cameron Dantzler, the corner from Mississippi State. So I like that even though they lost 2 corners in the offseason in Alexander and Waynes, they do draft 2 in the first 3 rounds in Gladney and Dantzler. Dantzler, the corner from Mississippi State, good value pick in the 3rd round at number 89 overall. So overall, I'm going to give the Vikings draft an A-. I actually really like it. I think it was one of the better drafts by any team. Gladney and Jefferson are 2 guys that immediately, right away, fill team needs. And I feel like with this draft, and really any draft, that is the main point. If you could, especially after the first round, if you could find guys that could be productive players and starters that fill holes, that immediately will be considered a successful pick. And when I look at the Minnesota Vikings draft, they didn't draft and come away with a star, but they did do, I think, a really nice job of filling holes, and that was really necessary, especially because this team lost so much from their defense this past offseason. Okay, and moving on to the final team whose draft we will be going over in the NFC North, and that will be the Chicago Bears. And the Bears were a team that actually not a lot of people were talking about going into this draft, and that's because the Chicago Bears, not only did they not have a first-round pick last year, but they didn't have a first-round pick this year, and that is a result of the Khalil Mack trade, who they got from the Oakland Raiders. And the Raiders had the Bears pick at number 19 overall, and they ended up taking Damon Arnett, the corner from Ohio State. But anyways, Chicago wasn't on the clock until pick number 43. And for the Bears, what are they doing taking a tight end at number 43 overall? Did you guys realize the Bears have like 8 or 9 tight ends on their roster? That's crazy. And when you look at Ryan Pace, this is another guy that he hasn't had that great of a history in drafts. As we all know, he was the guy that took Mitchell Trubisky at number 2 overall, not only over Deshaun Watson, but over Pat Mahomes as well. And the Bears franchise just hasn't really been able to get over that pick. And it's crazy that as bad as Mitch Trubisky was last year, and as much as every fan, rips on him, and he's awful, I totally understand that. Only 2 years ago, he did lead the Chicago Bears team to the playoffs, and he did put them in a position to win a playoff game. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. We all know what happened. Cody Parkey missed the kick, and the Bears have just been trying to recover since then. But with the 43rd overall pick, they take Cole Kmet, the tight end from Notre Dame. I understand this team lost Trey Burton, and that signing really didn't work out. But I just don't understand how this team has Adam Shaheen, and they bring in Jimmy Graham, and they have 6 other tight ends on the roster, and they decide to draft Cole Kmet, especially when you don't have a first-round pick, and the Chicago Bear team still has plenty of holes. So I didn't love that pick. But I will say this. I did like their second pick, number 50 overall, taking Jalen Johnson, the corner from Utah. I think Johnson is a guy that you could slot in right away. Good value pick at number 50, and I think he's going to be starting right next to Kyle Fuller at corner during week 1 for the Chicago Bear team. They weren't on the clock again until pick number 155. So the Bears didn't have a pick in all of the 4th round or all of the 3rd round. So their first 2 picks were really important. They ended up taking Kmet and Johnson, and I think Johnson was a really good pick. I think Kmet was a bad pick. So with that being said, I'm going to give the Bears a C+. I just think when you have holes, and every team has holes, I totally understand that. But especially the Chicago Bear team, I think they could have maybe signed an offensive line or drafted an offensive lineman, replaced Kyle Long, maybe another linebacker, maybe another safety in the secondary. But at the same time, they end up going with a tight end and a corner. So I'm giving the Bears a C+. I like the Johnson pick. I don't like the Kmet pick, but maybe Kmet's a player. Even though the Bears have tight ends, there isn't really a guarantee that any of them are going to be really good. And maybe Ryan Pace is just going with the strategy of, all right, I'm going to bring in as many tight ends as I possibly can. Odds are one of them is going to be good. Maybe we just need to find Mitchell Trubisky or Nick Foles a safety blanket, and then they'll improve. But I just don't necessarily know if that is always the right strategy to use. So I'm going to give the Bears draft after taking Kmet and Johnson a C+.